Welcome to the second part of this tutorial with me, Tim Clapham, for Maxon for their YouTube channel. And in this part of the tutorial, we're going to be looking at the exchange between Cinema 4D and After Effects once again, but we're going to be looking at a few slightly more advanced tricks, and we're also going to have a little bit of a look at some of the MoGraph shaders, which some of you might find useful as well. You can see that what I've got here is I've got the iPod that we used in the last tutorial in the scene, and I've also got a sky object with an HDR just for reflections and stuff. Now I've got rid of all the object buffers and the external compositing tags, and the iPod is pretty much as it is from the download, so you can just copy and paste that into a scene or just start with that scene. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at how we can create the whole range of iPod colors, and we can have a unique image on each screen. We're going to have a really simple animation just with a camera move, and we're going to then take that into After Effects, and we're going to look at using the exchange in combination with some third-party effects, things like trapcode particular and optical flares, as well as obviously working with the After Effects 3D layers. And the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to have a look at how we can use multipass, but this time with light passes, so that we can have a separate pass for each of our lights, which gives you even more control over your composite and grade, etc. To create like loads of our iPods, I'm just going to use a cloner object. So I'm going to hold down Alt, come up to the MoGraph menu, just add in a cloner, and this will then create a cloner set to linear by default with 3. So let's just set this to 7, and I'm going to just position them along Z for now, so just so we can see all the different iPods. I'm not going to use these settings when we start to animate, but this is a good way of showing all of our iPods. And if we just jump over to Finder for a moment, I have some reference images. Let's just have a quick look at these, and if we open them up, and I think this is one, and there we go, and you can see there are 7 different iPods, and each one has got an album cover or a kind of radio or something on it, and whoever set this up has kind of used a similar color to the actual iPod itself, so you get this nice link between the image and the color of the iPod, which is quite nice. So I thought what we could do is see how we could reproduce this in Cinema 4D. So the first thing we need to do is create some images for the screens, and I've done that for you, and they should have been included in the download. So if we select our screen material and we come to the color and the luminance channel, okay, I'm just going to actually clear this out from the color channel for this example. Come to the basic tab and just switch it off, and let's just use luminance for this example. Now, what we can do is we can use what's called the Multishader, and we can use that to bring in a whole folder of images, and then we can use effectors to control which one of those images is displayed. So under the texture slot, let's choose MoGraph Multishader. If we click to open this up, it's automatically added our Cinema 4D iPod JPEG. So I'm just going to clear that because I don't want any images in here to start with. And you can see we have this Add From Folder button. So what I'm going to do is click that and then locate the folder of images that was included with the download. Here we have the iPod screens folder, and if I just fold that down, you can see there's all the different screens. And if we click open, we then have our multi-shader populated, which is pretty handy. It does it all for us. And now if we render, you can see that all of our iPods have got the same screen. So it's using the color brightness. We could set this to index ratio, which would then use the number of our cloner, and you can see as soon as I've set that to index ratio, it's using the internal number of each clone, and each one gets a unique image. But we're going to be using a random effector to randomize the brightness of our clones, and that color brightness will then control this multi-shader. So that's a really simple way of taking one shader and having a whole collection of images so that all of your clones receive a unique image. Next thing I want to do is come to the iPod body material, and if we come to, for instance, the color channel, you can see in here what I've done is I've used a color shader. Now we could have just picked the color in the color picker up here, but I chose to use a color shader because what we're going to do is we're going to swap this out for the MoGraph Color Shader. And the MoGraph Color Shader is a way of adding color to your materials and then controlling that color, or which color is picked, by using effectors. So it's very similar to the multishader, except for the multishader will take textures and images as an input, whereas the color shader simply generates color. But that means you can use those colors within all your other materials, and you can use them, you know, with layer masks or inside gradients, those kind of things, and you can then control color over like hundreds and hundreds of objects depending on how you set up your effectors. And what we want to do in this example is set up a gradient of colors that matches the colors of the iPod, and it's also in the same order as our images for the screen, so that when we pick a certain color for the screen, we also have the same color for the body. If we make sure we've got our cloner selected, you can switch to the transform tab, and you can see here there is a way to transform the color of our clones. And now you can't really see that in a shaded view, but if you switch to one of the side views or the top view, you can see here we have all of our clones, and they're all represented by this simple grey colour. But if I actually move this around, you can see that what's happening is, well, actually you can only really see it on the screen, but it's because we've got materials on all of our objects. But you can see that the colour is changing as I move this around. And if we do something like add in MoGraph Effector, Random Effector, and we set this to colour mode on, you can see now, hopefully, if we switch to our perspective view, let's just display this as lines. And there you go, and you can see that the random effector is actually randomizing the color as well. And we can use this color not only to control our multishader, but to control our color shader as well. So what happens is you can take the colors that are generated through the random effector or just through the cloner itself, and you can map them over a gradient. And the easiest way to do that is inside a colorizer. Rather than just talk about it, let's just do it and it will make sense then. So if we select our iPod body, and then here where we have our color shader, I'm just going to actually clear this, and I'm going to add in a MoGraph Color Shader. And this is really generating a grayscale value based on the color of the clone. So what we want to do is we want to take that value and map it onto a gradient. And as I say, the easiest way to do that is with a colorizer. And a colorizer simply takes an input, in this case luminance, and it then maps a color from this gradient. So when it's black, it maps it from this end, and when it's white, it maps it from this end. So this gradient, we want to actually set this up to be the same colors as our reference. And if we come back to that reference and have a quick look, you can see we've got pink, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and then purple. So we need to set up a gradient that has the same number of colors and, you know, an equal distance between each color. So you can fold down the little arrow on the gradient and first of all set it to none for the interpolation, and you can see now we can move these knots and we can add some new ones. And we need to make sure that we have 7 along here with an equal gap, and then we need to make sure that we pick the right color for each one. And you can actually use the color picker and pick them directly from an image of the iPods, or you can just make up your own set of colors. It's entirely up to you. I've actually already done this. I'm just going to paste that on rather than sit there and pick all the colors. But you need to make sure that your knots are like 100 divided by 7, and you can type that in here. So if you want to make sure that this is the right distance, you just put in here 100 divided by 7 and it will work it out, and do that for each one. So obviously divided by the correct amount. So now we have all of these colors here. What will happen is when we use an effector, we can then pick one from each of these solid areas, and that will then be used as part of this material. So I'm just going to open this up. Actually, let's switch to basic, and we can call this colorizer MG color shader, just so that we know that this colorizer is colorizing our MoGraph color shader. If we then copy this switch to our luminance, open this up. You can see I've got the color shader in here as well. You can actually just right click and just choose paste channel, and it will replace that color shader that's already in the material. Same with the reflection. I can come in and I can just paste this onto all of my color shaders. So wherever I used that pink color before will now be replaced with the MoGraph Color Shader, and we should be able to then use an effector to control the color of our clones. If we just select the cloner object, come up to MoGraph, add in effector, shader effector. Now first of all it's set to scale, so I'm going to uncheck scale. And you can see that by default the color shader has color mode set to on, and it's using white as a color. So what that means is it will pick from our MoGraph Color Shader, it will pick this purple color, and from our Multishader it will pick this purple image. If it was black it would pick the image from the top, the pink one, and obviously from our gradient it would pick this pink color from here. But we should be able to see that if we select our shader effector, switch to fall off, and just set this to linear. Okay, and if we just increase this so that we have this traveling through, and you can see I'm now giving these a kind of grey color, and they're going from white to grey. And the reason they're going from white to grey is currently because the cloner under transform is set to grey. If we set that to black, you can see they're now going to go from white to black. Now I might not have mapped that very well because I'm just kind of doing it by eye, but we should see that it will pick a corresponding color from our multi-shader and from our color shader if we now render this. And there you go, and you can see it's actually working. Okay, so I haven't got it quite right. I've got these three at the end here, but you can see that we've got purple image, purple iPod, green image, green iPod, yellow, yellow, etc. So that's working pretty well. So we know that we've kind of set up our shaders correctly. The reason I added the shader effector was just to show you this. It's a really simple way of doing it. It uses pure white. By using the fall off, we kind of take that white all the way to nothing, and the nothing value is the original color, which is defined through the cloner transform. However, we're not using the shader effector. We're going to be using the random effector. So if we enable this, you can see it does give all of our clones a random color. In this example, it doesn't really matter about the hue or the saturation. We're working purely with the luminance or the color brightness. And if we select our color shader and open up the color shader, you can see that it's using the color of the object. And under screen, multi-shader, it's using the color brightness. You can actually, with the multi-shader, choose red, green and blue. And there's a few other options in there as well. If we render now and just take a look at and see what result we get, and you can see that now it's working, but what's happened is the screens are randomizing different to the actual body itself. So that's definitely not the result we want. And also we don't seem to have our full range of colors. Now we can select our random effector, come to the effector slot, and maybe we could just adjust the seed value in here, and that might give us a broader range. But one of the things we could do in here, which is a really cool feature, is to change the random mode. And the random mode is currently set to random. Now in here we have an option called sorted, and the best way to kind of explain the sorted mode is that it will only use one element once until it's used all of them. If you think of like something like a pack of playing cards, you've got 52 cards. Now you might have a multi-shader with 52 different textures in there for all of the different cards. When you put those into a cloner and you want to randomize the order of them, if you use the sorted mode, it won't repeat any of those cards until it's gone through all 52. So if you had 104 clones in your cloner, you would get every card duplicated twice. If you don't use the sorted mode and you use something like random or noise or Gaussian or anything like that, then it won't worry about that. So you will get things repeated, and you can see here we've got some repeated images and colors. The other thing I'm going to do is fold down the minimum and maximum, and currently the minimum and maximum values are set to maximum of 100% and minimum of minus 100%. Now I want that to be mapped between 0 and 100%, so it only uses that range and doesn't deviate from it. So I'm going to set my minimum to 0, and I'm going to set my random mode to sorted, Now if we render, we should see that the screens and the body match, and we shouldn't see any duplicates, and that looks like it's working well. Yeah, so there we go. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we've got all colors, and we've got all images on the screens. So you can see that the sorted mode does exactly what it says. Cool. Okay, I'm going to just save my project. Let's call this random color so we know what this effect is doing. And I do believe I have some layers down here. I'm just going to add one for effectors. Drag that on. I'm going to take this clone and just drag that onto my iPod layer as well. Okay, this random color, I'm going to switch to parameter and just disable position. I only really want this to affect the color of my clones. Actually looks as though there's one missing there, but I think that's just because it's the same grey as the background. If we just switch, like change the seed value, there you go, and you can see, yeah, we've just got one of the greys which matches up with the background, which is pretty obscure, but there we go. Okay, now I'm not going to clone them like this. What I want to do is set up a spline and have them offset along a spline. Then we can like fly the camera in, and then I want to export that to After Effects, and I want to be able to like link some data from specific clones so that we can you know, use that information in After Effects. But I'm going to add in, you know, quite a few hundred, and I don't want to export, you know, hundreds and hundreds of nulls to After Effects. So I'm going to show you how we can isolate specific clones and then use the data from those only. Before we do that, let's just set up the scene. To do this, I'm going to come in and add a linear spline. Let's switch to my side view, and I'm not so worried about whereabouts I put these 2 points. I'm just going to put 2 points, bring up my coordinates. Let's set this to be Z minus 5000. Okay, and if we press UI to invert our selection, and I'm going to put this one to Z 5000, so it's quite a big spline. Let's come back to our main view and press O and frame that object, and here you can see are our little iPods. I'm going to call this spline iPods, so we know what it's for, and just drag this onto my scene layer, and let's select the cloner, switch object tab, set the mode to object, and drag this spline into the field. As soon as we do that, we get all these extra parameters. Now I'm going to set the count much higher than 10. I think we probably want maybe you know, 200, 300, I don't know, let's try 200, something like that. We're going to have quite a few on here now, and there we go, and you can see it's starting to get a little bit sluggish already. I'm going to set the distribution to be even, so they're evenly spread across the spline. That shouldn't really make any difference because it's a linear spline with 2 points anyway. And let's just set the display to quick shading so we can see our iPods. And let's zoom in a bit closer, and you can see it's getting to be a little bit sluggish now. There's quite a lot of geometry there. So what we can do, obviously it's pretty tricky to work in a situation like this. You know, we can select our iPod, come to tags, cinema 4D tags, set display, and let's set the level of detail on that display tag to be 0. So what that's going to do, if I just disable that cloner and frame that iPod, you can see at the top here our kind of shapes all become really, really basic, you know, and it looks pretty awful. Obviously it's not going to look like that when we render it, but if we uncheck level of detail, you can see that it goes back to good quality. So basically all of the NURBS generators are kind of, the level of detail is reduced right down. You can also do that on the cloner itself, but what will happen with reducing the level of detail on the cloner is it will reduce the number of objects that you can see. And I'm going to use both of those so that I can reduce the level of detail on my object, but also the number of clones that are visible. Let's just enable this cloner again, and I'm going to just frame that object. I'm going to come up to options, level of detail, and set that to low. And you can see that the number of clones actually reduces right down. And everything becomes, you know, I can navigate in my scene, etc. now. Obviously when we render, the final render, it won't show us this reduced amount. It will render all of our iPods. So I've come in a little bit closer just so we can see what's happening. I'm going to select the cloner, switch to the transform tab, and I just want to reorient these iPods so that they are pointing kind of down the direction of travel. So I'm going to set the pitch to be -90, like that, and there we go. And now you can see that they're all kind of pointing in the right direction. With the cloner selected, come up to MoGraph and let's add in a random effector. I'm going to set this to just be position, so I'm going to call it random P for position and drop it onto my effector layer. Now if we switch to the parameter tab, and we can just adjust the amount of random position on these objects, and I'm going to set that to be, say, 300 by 0 by 300. Select the cloner and let's just press O, and you can see that now we have all of our iPods kind of in random positions. Let's just hide this spline. Now don't forget, the level of detail is reducing the number here. If we just put that back to high, it will take a moment to redraw all of them. But you can see that, there we go. Now you can see that we've actually got, you know, quite a lot of these iPods. I'm just going to switch that back to low so we can carry on working. Select the random P effector, and one thing we could do is we could maybe add some fall off so it looks as if you know, it's getting a bit narrower, almost like they're further away, just to kind of fake that a little bit. I'm going to move the effector to 2500, so it's sort of halfway between the middle of the spline and the end. Switch to the fall off tab and set this to linear. And you can see that's quite short. It is along the right axis, along the Z axis, but you can see that it's only set to like 100 units. So on this side of the effector, the random effector is working fully, and on this side it's not doing anything at all. I don't want the cutoff to be anywhere near as harsh as that, so I'm going to just set the Z value to be 5000. And you can you probably might not even see that. Let's just switch off visibility. But if we set that to infinite, you can see these ones jump out, and if I set that back to linear, you can see that then they narrow up. And when we can see all of them, that's just going to make it kind of narrow up a little bit towards the end, so that our kind of iPods look a little bit further away, a bit more bunched up. The other thing that I want to do is have it so that they're kind of always moving around, and we can do that a few different ways. And one of the things you can do is you can switch to the effector tab, and you can use noise as your random mode, but I'm going to leave it on random. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to animate the seed value, because that's quite a cool way of doing it as well. And as long as you animate that really subtly, so you only animate it over 2 or 3 values, you know, you won't see too much erratic behavior, which is unusual for a seed value, because normally with a seed value, when you animate it, everything changes. But because if you only animate it from, say, 1 2 3 4 5 to 1 2 3 4 6 or 1 2 3 4 7, then the change is pretty subtle. I'm going to set this scene to be 125 frames in all. I should have done that at the beginning really, but we haven't done any animation yet, so there's no problem there. Okay, and go to frame 0, and let's just add a key for the seed at 1 2 3 4 5. I'm going to come to the very end of the project and set this to 1 2 3 4 5, or 1 2 3 4 6 should I say. And there we go. So really we've only gone from 1 2 3 4 5 to 1 2 3 4 6 over a 5-second period. I'm also going to switch to the timeline, select this, and just press Alt L to make that linear. So now if we drag through, you can see that our clones are moving around, and that's because of the animated seed value. So as well as moving like that, I want them to travel along the spline, and we can just do that on the cloner itself. We switch to the Object tab. You can see that we have an offset parameter, and if we animate that offset, we'll animate our objects moving along the spline. And we can also add a little bit of variation in there, so some of them travel a little bit faster and some of them travel a little bit slower. Now I only want a small amount of variation, so I'm going to set that to be about 5. I'm going to just jump back to the first frame of the project. I'm going to set the offset to be 20, so we don't start at 0, and that means that we'll see a little bit of the variation. Let's add a key, and let's go to the very end of our project. So we started at 20, and let's set this to be, say, 50. Now, depending on how long your spline is, etc., you might want to adjust that offset, or depending on how fast you want them to travel. I want that to be linear as well, so I'm going to select the cloner, select the offset track, and just press Alt L once again. And now if we just press play, you can see, there we go, all of my clones are moving along. I actually want them to move the other way into the distance, so they're going the wrong way. So we could reverse this offset, or another way we can do that is we can select our spline, and then we can choose reverse sequence, like so. And now hopefully they're going the right way. And there you go. So you can see they're kind of moving up and down a little bit with the seed value from the random effector. Their position is changing, and they're obviously moving along the spline because of the offset that we've put on the cloner object. Okay, let's save at this point. As well as having offset on my clones and also random position, I'd like to have some random rotation on there. Now, of course, I could select this random effector, and I could switch to parameter, and I could enable rotation, and that would work perfectly well. However, I'm just going to show you like an alternative way of doing it. Now, depending on what you're trying to achieve, sometimes you might want to use a separate random effector for different elements. And an example here is that I want to use a different random effector for the color and for the position, mostly because obviously if I do use the same one, then the color would animate as well, because I'm animating the position, so that certainly wouldn't work. In this example, I could probably use this random effector for position and rotation, but I just want to show you a way that we can link some parameters together with Espresso and have separate random effectors, but just make our life a little bit easier by only having to animate one of them. So I'm going to select the cloner object, come to the effector menu under MoGraph, and add in another random effector, and let's call this random rotation, or just random R I'll call it, and I'm going to just drop this down here and add it to my effectors list. Okay, so uncheck position, let's enable rotation, and if we just come in a bit closer, something around here, just so we can see what's going on. And I think what we want to do is we actually want to adjust the heading, and if we, yeah, so I'm just going to scrub that value so I can see what happens. And you can see that now all of my iPods are going to kind of rotate along their heading. The reason that it doesn't seem like the heading, but it's because we're using the transform space of the node, which is the clone itself, and we've actually set our cloner to rotate these by 90 already, so that's why they're already lying flat. So I'm going to set this to just be, say, 360 for now. And again, what we would want to do is just animate the seed value. But for instance, in this example, maybe we want to use a different random mode, Gaussian or something like that, but we want to you know, still animate the seed value and keep it linked to the position so that the speed is always sort of relative. And that would be particularly handy if you were like easing into the animation or easing out of it. So as the seed value kind of slowly changed, so the position slowly changed, you know, the rotation did the same. And then if you changed any of the animation on the position effector, it would change on the random one too. So what we need to do is we say, okay, this value drives another value, and we're going to take the keyframe value from our random position effector, and if we right click on the parameter, choose animation set driver, so that means this value is going to drive another value, and then select our random rotation effector, right click on the same parameter. It could be a different parameter, but in this example it's the same, and we choose animation set driven, and you can choose absolute, which will use exactly the same value, or you can choose relative, in which case you could then remap that. Let's just use absolute, and you can see that what happens is that we have this Espresso tag added to our effector, and it also gives it a name, seed to seed, so we know the parameters that are being controlled. And if we open this up, it's very simple what's been added. You can see here's our random P effector. The seed value is output into a range mapper, and then the value from that is output into our random R effector. If we select the range mapper, you can see that here we have 0 to 100 and 0 to 100. So if we wanted to use this as a multiplier, we could say, okay, if I want it to be twice the value, we could just set the output to be 0 to 200. Or if we wanted it to be half, we could just set this to 0 to 50. But all that means now is if we select our random P, you can see that we're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we go to the end, we're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. And if we select our random R, you can see that that is the same. So it's taking the same value. So now if we press play and have a look, you can see that all of our iPods are actually rotating as well as moving along now. And of course, you can always select your random R and say, okay, well, I want them to rotate twice as much as that, so let's just set the RH value, the rotation heading, to be 720 instead of 360. Cool, so now we've got all of our clones animating along the spline. Let's add in a camera, and we can start maybe pulled right out, and we can zoom in so that we're fairly close.